all that I can for quite a while. So I'm glad it's still kicking and going up there. Well, today, we're going to talk about two things. One is worry and the other is happiness. You probably got a glimpse of that. Now, the thing about worry, caution, fear, worry itself, that's just unproductive and doesn't do any good for you. Being cautious about things, that's a wise thing to do sometimes. I mean, there are times in jobs that you have sometimes where you got to do the uncautious thing to help other people. And that's all right too. Fear. Now see, the fear in the Bible is used a few different ways too. Like the fear of God. That's a good thing. But the fear that it talks about in the Bible where it says, don't be afraid, fear not, that kind of thing. The kind of fear that will stop you from doing anything you're supposed to do and paralyze you is not the fear that we should ever have as Christians. God doesn't give that to us. That is something that somebody with no hope would have. And when I was teaching emergency services classes, one of the things that I told my students was that I thought everybody should be taking a first aid class, or an advanced first aid class, or a CPR class. Not because I think everybody's going to be involved in having to do it, but when you're faced with a situation that you don't expect, traffic accident, something, critical thing, if you don't have any idea what to do, fear is your default. Okay? Standing still is what you default to. And that doesn't help anybody. As a matter of fact, it doesn't help you get out of the area either. So it's good to know what to do with situations. So I always advise them, first off, pay attention to the classroom, but keep learning things, keep taking classes. Think about those things that might happen to you and figure out a plan. Because people without a plan, they're crippled by fear. Christians aren't any different. Stuff comes at us. If you have no plan to combat it, well, let me show you. First off, the word fear or worry, care, anxiety, this particular Greek word occurs 6 times in the New Testament. And it's not ever positive. I'm sorry, there's a good part coming. So in Matthew 13:22, it says, it's Jesus when he's talking about those different kinds of seeds being sown in different kinds of soil. This is a particular kind. He says, as for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. The cares of the world, all on their own, can choke out the word of God, the gospel message, if you're not already rooted in it. And as for the Christian who may have those roots in there, has that salvation that is solid, because it doesn't depend on you. But you know what? Our heads can get all spun around if we look at the cares of the world just too much and not the dependence that we have on God. See, we worry about stuff because we feel out of control. And, sometimes the biggest illusion is thinking you had control in the first place. This world belongs to my God. And there are forces that we cannot see pushing back and forth in this world around us. To think you really have control over it in the first place is kind of a problem. To know that God has ultimate control over all of it, see, that's a solution. That's where I go to fix it. If I'm left on my own, then I'm trying to scheme and plan and trying to do stuff. But if I wait for God to do it, and to use me to do what I need to do, then there's not as much worry involved. I had this thing happen. I'm going to testify too. A little different testimony though. I was in here on Tuesday or Thursday. I was studying and putting together this message, kind of finalizing it. And I'd spent a couple hours in there working on this, and I wrapped it up. I was leaving, I locked the door, got in my car, because if I'm here, I put the car out there so people know. So I got in the car, and as I'm starting to pull out, somebody pulls in. And I watch people that pull in. So I watched them, and they parked. So I went ahead and drove all the way to my house. And I got out, and he's getting out, and he's taking pictures of our church. I thought, okay, it's a pretty church, all right. But I'm going to find out who this is. So I walked over. This is like 2-3 minutes after I finished working on this sermon. The guy tells me he just bought our church at a tax auction. He's taking pictures of his new property.
Lord.
Yeah, the things I get during the week, you have no idea. So we had a chat, and I mean, it was fine. He had a great attitude about it. I had a good attitude about it. And the thing was, he wanted to stop and let somebody know, because he was in Little Rock. He wanted to let somebody know that the church had fallen behind their taxes, and he bought the property, so that we could fix it with the state. I mean, he was trying to get us to get out from under what he just did. Because he goes to church, he thought it was the best thing to do. So I got with the county. Turns out the county maps are wrong, just so y'all know. And so he thought, and he bought this thing, he looked it up, county map. It was actually half our church. What he bought was a parcel that's like under half an acre. So he like bought the first half of the church, he thought. I don't know how service was going to work with that. I got with the county, they got it all straightened out within a couple hours. That the maps were just wrong. And they contacted him and let him know. His property, he might become a neighbor. He's actually over there a little across Logak somewhere. But for a couple hours, on the heels of doing this sermon, I was like, I would say concerned. I wasn't sure how that was going to work, but I knew God had it one way or the other, but there's some human I couldn't take out of the equation there. And wow. So anyway, I understand what it's like to be taken by surprise by things. And man, God's timing is something else some days. In Luke 21:34, we're told, and like I said, minutes. But watch yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down. And this says with dissipation, drunkenness, and cares of this life. You see that? Even plain with drunkenness and dissipation is the cares of life. Because they'll all drag you down. And that day come upon you suddenly like a trap. Watch out, guys, because stuff can happen. In the blink of an eye, you go from being awesome with God to, I don't know what I'm going to do. But it's okay, because we have a great big God. And we have each other. First thing I did was reach out to Jenny. I was like, do you have any idea about this? She's like, I haven't. So at least we worried together for a second. Or we're concerned together. But guys, some stuff just, and you know that, you got your own things. But the Bible gives us some clear pictures here. 1 Peter 5:6 and 7. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him, because he cares for you. I did some of that. I cast some anxieties on him. There was some prayer time. But there was only a couple minutes where I really was, I don't know what to do here. I mean, thankfully I held it together while I was talking to the guy. I mean, you know, those thoughts about just telling him to go get a lawyer and take a leak, this is our place. But that didn't seem right at the time. And I'm glad I didn't do it, because we have a good thing going right now. I hope to invite him to church. Philippians 4. I love Philippians, but 4 especially. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. He's writing this to a church that's being persecuted. They're not wondering if somebody has bought their land. They're getting thrown in jail. They're getting beaten. They're losing their jobs. And he says, rejoice. Rejoice always. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. Like I said, I had just finished reading and praying over these words when I met that man. The Lord is at hand. And I'm glad I was reasonable. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And, this is like after you do these things, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. I don't know what I'd have done if I hadn't just been in these words. It was rough enough anyway. But I thank God he gave you the example, right? Rejoice in the Lord. Let people see that you're reasonable. Let people see that there's a reason why you believe what you believe. It's just not something out there. I believe in a God that has shown up in my life. I believe in a God that has done things. I believe in a God that has changed me and holds me. Now, the word that is used for happy or blessed, depending on how you want to read that. Makarios. Supremely blessed. Supremely fortunate. Supremely well off. Supremely happy. Is how that word is used. And it happens over 50 times in the Bible, in the New Testament. 50 times. I love the ratio between cares and anxieties and happy in the Bible. I want you to see some of how it's used. In Matthew 5, starting in verse 3, blessed, extremely, supremely happy are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Something I want you to see in all of these. We talked about a little earlier that worry, the care, anxiety. And that's a fun word too. You know, we use words, the same word for different meanings sometimes, which makes English such a tough language for other people. Because they learn one thing and they don't understand there's a nuance over here that means a different thing, but the same word. Like anxiety. There is being nervous about things, anxious about things. And then there's like a clinical thing, an actual medical problem with anxiety. It's a whole other thing to deal with. And you honestly can't take the people with a medical problem and tell them, just be happy. You can't happy your brain chemistry back to right. You just can't do it. So there's a point where we need to understand there are physical things that need to be dealt with. But there's another point with the emotional things we need to understand. We got to give stuff to God. But look at what he's saying here. Happy are the poor in spirit. Happy are the ones that are mourning. Happy are the ones who are meek or feeling below. Useless. Humble is another word for meekness, but it doesn't really gather all the flavor of it. See, being meek is to think that you don't have value and worth. See, those people that didn't think they had any value and worth, they're going to inherit the earth. The people who are mourning will be comforted. The people who are poor will get the kingdom of heaven. You understand the back and forth here. The thing is, the happiness, the supreme joy that is being talked about for these people doesn't happen unless they have a problem. He's not speaking about inheriting the kingdom except to the poor. He's not speaking of comfort except to the ones that are mourning. To really understand what God can unleash in our lives, we have to understand we need problems sometimes. Don't go start them. But we need to have something to trust God for. And it comes. You do not have to go looking for it. But when it shows up, how we look at it, that is so important. This problem that just fell on top of me again, it's just one more to weight me down. I don't know how I can deal with it. Or it's one more opportunity to trust my God and to see what He's going to do with it. I'm not trying to paint some like pie in the sky stuff here. I'm not that kind of preacher. What I'm telling you is, for every problem we have, God's got a solution. He's got something for us. Even if we have a problem that leads to our death, He's got a solution in eternal life. And by the way, every single one of us, when we were born, we had an appointment with death. It's coming for all of us. Unless Jesus comes back first. I mean, I'm good with that. But if He tarries a little bit longer, every single one of us will die. It's not that destination we need to be concerned about. The destination of after that, that's important. And the journey, how we take the trip from here to the grave, is important. We can take it like drudgery. We can take it like, it's so terrible. Or we can stand up and trust God. But sometimes that's all we got to hold on to. He goes on, he says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. In a world we have today, you got no problem finding ways to hunger and thirst for righteousness. There's not a lot of it out there. Let it be known to your God. Pray for this. Pray for that world out there. Pray for those people that are making all the horrible decisions they're making right now. Pray for the hearts that need to be changed. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. You being merciful to others, God being merciful to you and me. I've told you before, I know what God has had to forgive me for. I know what a wreck I am apart from Him. So when it comes to mercy or forgiveness, I've got no problem with those things. Because there's no way I want to turn around and look to my God, who has given me so much forgiveness and so much grace and so much mercy, and say to Him, I can't forgive that person. I can't let that go. I'm not brave enough to say that. I'm sorry. Because I read that verse that says, if you don't forgive others, He won't forgive you. And, it's kind of one of the important Bible writers that recorded that. It's a direct quote from Jesus, so I take it seriously. Look at this. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. You want to see God? Here's a goal for you. Work on being pure in heart. Blessed are the peacemakers. This is really cool in Law Enforcement Week. We use this verse all the time. Because you got to understand it if you look at the news. But our law enforcement guys are out there to keep peace. They're out there to protect people. They're out there in their own way trying to make a difference all the time. Every time they show up to work. And because of some issues with some of them, a lot are being maligned for it. I know a lot of law enforcement officers. My father was a law enforcement officer. The guys I know are wonderful, terrific guys. The ones that are currently in it, the ones that have been in it. There are guys out there that have made mistakes. Yeah. But there's so many out there that just want to make things peaceful. They just want to make a difference and help. And not just those guys, everybody. Instead of seeking strife over something, to seek peace. You see a lot of that out there in the world? People just trying to be peaceful? Man, the media just wants to stir up the strife. I guess there's no money to be made in peace. But I think there's a lot of other things to be made in peace. Like, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. I don't know, in the whole scheme of things, if what I'm going to say right now is true or not. It's how I think of things, so I'm letting you know, this is my opinion. Sometimes I think there is going to be a difference between being the Son of God, which I am. I know I am. There's no doubt in my mind that I am. I mean, called the Son. See, and a lot of times when we read in the Bible, people are called according to their character. They get a name depending on how they've been living. I don't just want to be the Son of God. I am, but that's not where I want to stop. I want Him to call me His Son. I don't know if you realize it or not. There's a little difference there. I want Him to be able to, I don't know who He talks to in heaven, but I want Him to be able to just tell Him, that one's mine. And so, I try to make peace. I try to be merciful. There are so many things covered in here. But in all of it, extreme, off the edges, happiness and joyfulness can be had in the middle of all these circumstances. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. That's not a fun thing, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Now we're getting to the news. Man, Christians are getting picked on all the time. But you know what? It's not new to God. It shouldn't be new to us. It's just something we ought to expect. But the thing is, even in the middle of persecution, in the middle of being yelled at, talked about, falsely accused of things, in the middle of all that, we can have joy and happiness. Because we know God. Because we know He is going to fight that battle for us. Just like the army of Israel, we got to show up and do what we are told to do. But the battle is God's. Sometimes we just show up and watch Him work. And sometimes we got to put a shoulder to it and do some work. But at all of it, we trust Him. And He will give us joy. I'm going to finish with this. Matthew 5:12. Rejoice and be glad. Whatever happened before this, I want you to just plug this in. Rejoice and be glad. For your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Don't worry about it. Trust God. Let Him give you some joy. I just want you to pray for a minute. Just take time, bow your head, pray.